welcome to our fourth Dollars and Donuts of the semester. Today's speaker is going to be Steve Castle, the Director of Alumni and Advancement Relationships here at Spin Arbor. Ish, yes, close. He graduated here in 2005, spent a couple of years in Zambia working with the Peace Corps, and then got his master's in 2012. Today he's going to be talking about good debt. He'll have a little help, but he'll introduce her later. And so feel free to grab more coffee and donuts as we go. This will be about 10-15 minutes, and then we can ask any good questions about all the debt we are accumulating at this moment. Steve Castle.
Thanks, Zach. All right, and then if I am going over it all, Zach, whoever, just tell me.
Give you a
So good debt. So I remember when I was an undergrad student, I had a class with Dr. Chuck White, and he's still here, a professor. And he talked about the church being like a drunk guy on a donkey, and how it kind of has the tendency to kind of fall on one side or the other. So the person's on the donkey and kind of traveling down the road, and so you kind of are leaning too far this way, and then you fall off. And then so you kind of get back on. You're like, well, I fell off the right side. I better kind of lean to the left to kind of make sure they don't fall off the right. And then what you end up doing is you end up falling off the left side. And so that analogy has really stuck with me, not just with the church, but just with things in life, because I think as people, we have a tendency to kind of err on one side or the other, kind of to swing to extremes. So with debt, I think that's kind of one that I've noticed even in my not that long of a life, kind of generationally, people kind of have extreme different views on debt. So kind of probably like in the 90s, early 2000s, when all the housing stuff happened, people are just buying stuff like crazy and spending a lot more than they have. And so it's just like, debt's the best thing in the world. Capitalism has enabled this, and so we just need to spend. It's our, it's our civic and democratic duty just to spend money. And now I kind of see, after some of the disasters that have happened from that perspective, kind of another extreme swing where it's debt's the worst thing in the world. You should never have debt. For no reason should you ever take out a loan for anything. And so I kind of hear some people talk about that. So I think that that's kind of the extremes that we can have, and a lot of times, with most things in life, there's a balance to things. So that's kind of what I'm going to get at today is there good debt? What is that? And then kind of what's a good perspective with debt. So kind of with having a right perspective about money, debt, all that kind of stuff, the main thing to remember is that all is God's to start with, and we're just stewards. So when you approach anything, the philosophy that you have towards it works a lot better than just, what's the formula that I can just check off and follow this thing in life? Because things always, change and evolve, so we have to have the right philosophy and perspective, because then that helps us to keep the right mindset towards things, no matter kind of what changes with culture. So, if we kind of have that fundamental understanding that all is God's already and that we're stewards, that's important. Then how much should I keep for myself? How much should I invest? And how much should I get indebted of God's money? Because if we're taking out debt, we're basically putting on loan God's money, because it's His to start with. So if we're going to do that, is it stuff that is glorifying to God? Down. So, kind of thinking about good debt, question mark. So debt-free is definitely worth striving for. So I am very frugal, almost to a fault. That's kind of my tendency, where I don't like to spend money. I'm kind of weird where, like, if I go to the mall and I leave and I haven't bought anything, I have this excited feeling like I beat people, and I beat the world in its game of trying to make me buy crap I don't need. So it does come easier for me. I grew up a pastor's kid. My dad worked, didn't make a lot of money, and my mom always was a stay-at-home mom. And so we didn't have much, and so that really was just kind of ingrained to be frugal. But I have brothers that were raised the exact same way, and they spend much more freely, than I do. So a lot of it is personality, but it also comes from being raised. But so definitely my default is to say, avoid debt and strive to be debt-free. But if the way that you're leaning is that debt's the worst thing in the world, it is important to remember that the opportunity for debt can be a huge blessing. I have the opportunity to lead some cross-cultural trips here at the university, and so this past year when we brought another group to Zambia, which is sub-Saharan Africa, we got a chance to meet at the University of Zambia, which is kind of the premier institution for Zambia, and talking to the college students there, just the chance to get into the college there is pretty extreme, and it's only the wealthiest that can go, and those that have, parents that are working for the government, things like that. And then most people throughout the nation that you talk to, they can't afford to go to college. And their college costs about $1,000 a year, which is about 35 times less than what you guys pay for college. Well, with all of the loans and grants and things like that. Probably comes out to about half that, but they're paying 20 to 40 times less for college, and they can't afford to go because there's no opportunity for loans. So if it was set up like it is in our country, where it's easy to get loans so that you can get higher education, it actually would be a huge bonus to their economy, because then you're getting a lot of people that are trained to go out and work. And so, so a thing like debt that on a surface level just seems like the worst thing ever for some of us. Being in the type of society we are, being in a capitalist economy and being able to have access to loans is actually a huge blessing if you use them appropriately. So things like going to college, the opportunity to get a home so that you don't just have to rent your whole life, because if for your home you always had to pay cash up front for your full house, most of us could never buy a home. So that's a blessing that we can actually take out a loan to get a home. Business opportunities, if every entrepreneur had to wait before they had 100% cash to pay for whatever business, there probably wouldn't be any businesses that were ever developed. And then even necessary transportation. If you need to get a car that actually runs well because you can get to your job, you can't actually get that job or go to it if you don't have a vehicle. And so, sometimes it does make sense, and it is a blessing. So just want to kind of share that perspective. And then now I'm going to turn over to Jillian for a couple of minutes. She's a 2015 grad, and she works in the president's office. But she has kind of her story of how she did go after debt and tackle it really quickly. So kind of give that example as well.
Yeah, so like you said, I was an undergrad student here for 4 years, and I was able to pay off all my student loans in 2 years. So I had heard people say that that was their goal before, as a student, like, I'm going to pay off my debt in 2 years, and I was like, yeah, right. Like, there are plenty of people 35 that are still paying on their debt. It's still this big burden to them, and I'm like, it's not possible to pay it off so quickly. But as a graduate, it was so important to me to pay it off because I didn't want to be bound by that debt. So I did just a quick Google search to see the national average of student loan debt is about $30,000 a year. I didn't have quite that much. I know everybody's situation is a little different based on how much you've taken out, what type of job you get after graduation, and that all affects how quickly you're able to pay it off. But I just have a couple pieces of advice if that seems like something that you'd like to do. Like, I'm just a normal person, a normal Spring Arbor grad that was able to do it. So one of my first pieces of advice is, as a college student, you have practiced and perfected the art of living like you're poor, right? So like, you go out to eat with your friends and you like split something, or you only get water, you don't pay for a drink, or you like go to Meijer and like only get the bread and peanut butter that you need, and you don't like get the cookies that are calling your name. So I continued living like that after I graduated. So even though I started getting paychecks and my bank account started going up, I pretended that I was still a college student. I was living like I was poor because I had practiced that. I was good at it. So just because I have this money now coming in doesn't mean I just need to like go crazy and spend it on all this stuff because I can. A lot of the attitude I took was, it was kind of my mantra of saying like, I have negative money. So even though my bank account has cash in it, I have higher debt than what I have. So I really don't have anything, because all of that money in my mind was going toward my student loans. So I didn't go on any vacations. I didn't buy a new car after graduation. I didn't do anything because that money, to me, wasn't mine. It was going toward my loans at some point or the other, barring any, emergencies. And the last practical piece is, I paid as much as physically possible each month for my loans. So your loans don't kick in until 6 months after you graduate, but that first month I was done, I started saving up my money. So my very first payment, I paid about $5,000. So I had, like those 6 months I was saving up huge chunks of money, keeping it in the bank. So that first one, I paid off a ton. Every month I paid at least $800 on my loans. And the payments are like $200-ish, depending on how much you have and what type of loan and But I didn't want to just pay the minimum. I wanted to knock that debt out. I wanted to not get interest. And I fought. It's like I was like actively fighting my loans so that I could get them done. And my last payment was like so exciting. I just wanted to tell everyone like, I'm debt free. Oh my gosh, I did it. So it's worth that sacrifice. You know how to sacrifice, you know how to live poor, do it a little longer. It's totally worth it.
Neat. Yeah, so I definitely appreciate her perspective, because I think, not to talk about how much or little she makes, but she's not making massive amounts of money working here at Spring Arbor. And the job she took out right after college, she was in Indianapolis, and it also was not a super lucrative position. Because I think sometimes you can see if somebody does that, oh, they're making 200 grand a year, that's really easy for them. But somebody that's making, very kind of modest or teacher type of salary, just kind of the average type of wage, it's super possible. And so really her example to me is if she can do it, anybody can do it, and not in a bad way, but I mean to say she's the very kind of average type of income. I mean, we're kind of in that similar level, so that's why I just wanted to, to let her share her story, but also so that now you've kind of seen her face, and if you do have questions, whether that's today or a year from now after you graduate, like I remember somebody a while back talked about it and it sounded possible, and that's probably what I'm making right now. And so like she wanted to do that just to be a resource. So so it is possible. It's an awesome thing to do. And like she said, it wasn't really her money, because that money that's coming in, you owe that to a bank. So really as it's coming in, I mean, it's God's money, but it's also the bank's because you're taking out that loan. So you're paying them off first, giving them back what they gave to you, which is awesome, so that you could come and get an education, get your job. So thank you very much for taking a risk, giving me a loan, and expecting that I'll pay it back. So now I'm excited to give you your money back so I can move on with life. So that's really, it's not these mean debtors that are trying to take money from you. It's these people that have made it so you could go to school, and it was a nice opportunity. So, so is there such a good thing, or a thing such as good debt? So I kind of talked about a few different things with that. There are 3 that I'm going to mention that I kind of talked about before, but in mentioning those, it's assuming you can easily afford the payments and they don't become the lead factor of life. So those things would be the student loans like I talked about, home mortgage, and a new business would be, some of those things that might fall in the good debt category. There could be other things, but those are kind of 3 that are often highlighted for that reason. And what I mean by easily afford the payments, so just to say, okay, a home mortgage is in the category of good debt, so I can just take out whatever I'm able to get for a home because that's in the good debt. That still would not be the case, because it's easy to get a loan for a lot more home than we need. And same with student loans. Some people after they graduate college, they say, hey, my loans won't kick in if I go to grad school, so I'm going to go to grad school. I'm not sure what I want to do, but I just want to keep deferring my loans forever. So, student loans is a good debt, so I'm just going to go to school forever. So for some of you, that might be the right thing to do, to keep going and get an education, go on and get a doctorate and things like that. But others, if the only reason you're doing it is because it falls under the good debt category, you're just not sure what else to do, even student loans might not be the right thing. And same, some undergrad students, if it's going to be, they're not getting any scholarships and things like that, and they're taking massive amounts to go to their undergrad, those loans might not be best, and maybe they should first go to a community college and things like that. So you still have to have that perspective as you look into it. So I'm going to read real quick from a book that someone in my office gave to those in the office. It's like one of those kind of daily reading type things, but it's called Minute of Margin. And it's been really good because it just kind of looks at kind of our societal way of having no margin in our life, the business that we have, the way we just kind of rush around everywhere. So this one actually kind of talks about this manufactured need that we have in our society, which comes back to the debt. So yeah, this reading is called Manufactured Need. It says, advertising may be described as the science of arresting the human intelligence long enough to get money from it. And then it goes on to say, margin and the advertising industry are enemies. Margin requires contentment to thrive, but advertising requires discontent to thrive. As a specific strategy, most advertising consciously stimulates a chronic state of discontent. Were everyone in America to adopt a scripturally authentic lifestyle of contentment, each of us would need fewer new clothes, toys, furniture, and automobiles. As a consequence, our discontent-dependent, debt-sponsored economy would be put at risk. The only way to avoid such economic risk is to continually convince the public that more and better is desirous. If this need creation is successful, a consumption-based economy might be benefited, but at the same time, personal and family stability will be put at risk. Discontent and debt are both destabilizing forces. So when kind of, on the previous slides, talking about how it can't be the focal point of your life, even those loans. So even within there, it talks about how the loans can become all-consuming, and even your family stability can be put at risk, because everything in your life now becomes about paying this off, or this thing that's hanging over your head if you've taken out debt in a way that it's not sustainable. So so a lot of it just comes down to the contentment. So even with good debt, contentment, patience, and delaying pleasure is the key to debt discernment and proper life stewardship. And you got to always think through what are actual necessities. So if we have contentment, if we have patience, and we're able to delay pleasure, we can look at things and say, what is a necessity? So as I mentioned, you can qualify for a lot more loans than you actually need. So if you actually should get a house that's $100,000, the bank will probably say you can buy one for $400,000, and they would probably give you that much money and say over 30 years you can pay it off. And that's a pretty typical type of thing, and a lot of people do that. But that's where, kind of like in that little snapshot there, how everything in life now kind of gets out of whack because you're kind of overstretching. And then, like I mentioned, furthering education may be a good fit, or it may not. It depends on your perspective, but it depends on what actually are you called to do. And then kind of wrapping up, a few tips. So stuff that you guys have probably heard, but be careful with credit cards. And use as if they're cash, because credit cards, the main issue with those is it's really easy to spend because you're swiping it, you don't feel like you're actually spending anything, and then the interest rates on those are just astronomically higher than they are for anything else. So maybe your college debt might be like a 6% interest rate, credit cards are like 24%. So if you took out $1,000 and in 1 year $240 would just be interest towards that, and so just paying off the minimum payment, you're never even touching the principal. So that's why credit cards are so dangerous. Because if people rack up like 10 grand in credit card debt, $2,400 a year is just paying the interest, and you're still never even touching the principal or the 10 grand. So you can really get in a really scary cycle. So that's why there's huge warnings with credit cards. So people can use them responsibly. I use credit cards a lot, but you pretend like it's just cash, so I get the bonus miles. But even with that, when people say I use responsibly, it's still a lot easier to spend more on a credit card than with cash. So you still have to really check yourself. So I would definitely recommend using debit card instead, or even the best, I would say, especially if you have not practiced that muscle of just being frugal and trying to live like you're poor, like Jillian said, just use cash, because then you actually see, like with the envelope system, if you say here's $400 for the month for groceries, or here's $100 a month for entertainment to go out to the movies or whatever, you can see, oh, within a week and a half, that whole envelope is gone. I'm spending way too much on this or that, and you can actually feel and physically see what you're spending, and so it helps to develop those habits. So then maybe later you don't need that anymore because you've developed how to do that, but that's definitely a practice I'd recommend if you're in that place where you need to develop those muscles. And then when you do have debt, tackle the highest percent loans first, and the reason for that is just because if one is at 15%, it's accruing a lot more interest, where if one's at 5%, it's accruing less. So if you go after the bigger percentage interest loan first, overall you're going to pay a lot less money. Dave Ramsey says the opposite, but that's with his debt snowball, but that's because he's really just trying to encourage people that are totally out of control with their life to start that momentum of good feeling of paying off the smallest loan. But as far as just economically looking at how you're going to save the most money, paying off the highest percentage actually makes the most sense. Consolidate higher interest loans, so that just means if you have, like I said, a loan at 15%, a loan at 5%, if you can get a company to then take that loan that you have and then repackage it and give you an 8% loan or something like that, that's going to save you a lot. So if you can refinance and get a loan that's a smaller rate, especially if it's one that's going to take 10 years to pay off or something, you'll save a lot of money by consolidating loans together. And then pay off quickly when it makes most sense, like Jillian's case. If you're able to do it, you don't want to pay off so fast that you leave no money in savings. So if the car breaks down, you're in trouble, or then you have to start using credit card debt to pay off little bills. So don't pay off in that way. But if you're able to pay off quickly, definitely do it. 10-10-80 principle, that's just kind of the idea of 10% you tithe, 10% you save, and 80% spend however you want. So you can flex that in a lot of different ways, but that's a good standard principle that people look at. And then last thing is don't wait to be generous or tithe. I think sometimes you can say, once I get everything out of the way, then I'll start tithing, or then I'll be generous, but right now I just have to focus on me. even when we have debt and we're don't feel really rich, you're still one of the richest people in the world, and it's just a fact. We hear it all the time, but it's because it's true. And so even when we have a little and things are tight, we still have to trust the Lord. We still have to be generous. And so don't wait, until everything's cracked out necessarily before you steward in that way as well. So if there's any questions, I do have a couple worksheets if anybody wants any. This one is just kind of some checkpoints on smart money decisions after graduation, so just some helpful tips. And then this one, kind of based on the 10-10-80 principle, it's just a budgeting sheet where you could just kind of fill in your own numbers and kind of get an idea of where budgeting is. This is the Chris DeBacker at the Free Methodist Foundation down the street. This is kind of a worksheet that he's given out when he does presentations. And then I do have other slides that actually show some examples of paying off debt, how much you save if you pay off loans at a certain speed and things like that. So if you want to see any of those, be happy to share them. But at this point, I'll turn it over for questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so I use EveryDollar when I budget, and there's lots of websites like that.
Mhm.
And sometimes you can hook up your bank account, so it's easier to fill in all the information. Is there like dangers with doing that, of like sharing information? Sorry, this isn't really, I guess, kind of off topic, but like, is that something that, like,
Sharing your information.
yeah, should I be worried that someone can get my bank account information if I hook it up with one of these websites?
As long as what's the one called?
EveryDollar, it's the one
Yeah.
that Dave Ramsey.
Yeah. If it's a reputable site and stuff, I wouldn't typically have concerns. There's a lot of safeguards and stuff now, so like, our credit card, just like 3 weeks ago, we got a random bill for $500 that we didn't do, and so you just call the card and they're like, oh, somebody probably did it. They sent us a new card. We don't pay for things. So there's a lot of like safeguards and insurances that all these companies have, and so typically, even if something happened, as long as you weren't irresponsible, it should be safe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and really, there's almost no way, because you probably heard how like Target, had 80,000 people's credit card things that went missing over one of the Christmas holidays like 2 years ago. So there's always some of that danger. So a lot of this, you can get those free credit scores and get your credit reports and things like that. So it's a good habit to get into, just to look at those once in a while, because then you can notice if anything weird happened and get a hold of your company, because that is kind of freaky sometimes, like where that can kind of mess you up. But because it's a lot more common and there's a lot more safeguards in place, there's a lot, I think, less danger than there probably was when credit cards first came out. And I did want to mention too, if anybody does have to go, this is, you're welcome to, so you're always free to go. You're welcome to get more coffee and donuts, but linger as long as you'd like and ask as many questions you want. Zach?
Where do car loans fit into the good debt, bad debt situation?
Yeah, so I think with car loans, to me, a lot of it comes down to the stewardship thing of, so how much car do I need? So there's, if you're getting a clunky car and you have a long drive to work and you're gonna every 2 weeks have to fix something, and so it's making you miss work because now you're always at the mechanic and you're actually losing money, it probably makes sense to buy a more expensive car that's gonna be really dependable over the long run. So I think a lot of it's how much car do you need, what can you get by with. If you're just getting it because I want the leather seats, I want it to look fancy and stuff like that, especially if you were still paying off other debt, that's where you just need to be patient and pretend like you don't have the ability to do that. But yeah, I've always kind of gone like the middle of the road, where I haven't ever bought new, and that's just kind of the example my parents have set, and they often would get like a 1 or 2 year old car, because typically after a year or two it's like 40% cheaper than it was brand new, but it's still got like 20 years left on it, and it's only got 30,000 miles and stuff, and so and then I drive them for a really long time basically until they're not super dependable anymore. So but yeah, car loans, you can sometimes get them for pretty cheap. So it's not wrong to do it, but get a good rate and don't get more car than you need necessarily. And Matt Hill would say never, ever do a car loan. He has like 280,000 miles on his minivan, but he's more extreme than me, because I'm like, you got 4 little kids, and if you're like stuck on the side of the road, that stinks. So it's all, but I respect his perspective a lot as well. It's awesome. Other questions? Yeah.
Okay, what recommendations do you have for like when you can't find a job like right out of graduation, like in your field? So like maybe you don't have a job at all, or like you're working like a minimum wage job looking for a career position.
As far as like how much to go after debt?
Yeah, like how do you approach all that? Yeah.
Do you care if I talk about
Yeah,
that,
please
unless
do.
you have something to say?
No, go ahead.
So right out of college, I got an office job, not making much, but making more than minimum wage. And after a couple months of dissatisfaction, I left that job to become a barista. I continued paying $800 a month, but that was just based on how much I had saved, and that was just my situation. So I would recommend just budgeting, looking at how much you can do, and literally if $300 is all you can do, you're doing your best, you know? So as long as you're making it a priority, and then, you know, if you're still job searching and find something, then you can re-budget,
Did you have a job like right after graduation, like to go to?
Yeah, there was like a month span that I didn't.
Okay.
That I had accepted the job but wasn't going to start for a month. So.
Okay.
That's what's great about the 6-month grace period, because I mean, that's why it's built in, to kind of give you that buffer to kind of find work. But also, like, you know, some people, there's a stigma of, oh, what if I move in with family or something like that? If it's a thing that fits well for you, then do it, you know, and don't take a job based on what profile picture on Facebook you're gonna put, or, you know, I'm gonna go to New York City just so I can show pictures of that. If that's where you wanna be and that's the right fit, then great, but don't base your decisions on what other people are gonna think. So if you got a decent amount of debt and your family's, well, you know, happy to have you and you're able to find a job in the area, then why not save $8,000 that year on renting a place and just crack out that debt? And so maybe it's not the right fit for you to do that, but don't be nervous to do things like that, you know, to move in with family or something, if it's the right fit for you, just because you're nervous that people think that it's not as cool or something like that. So a lot of that just comes down to that patience and perspective, and doing what's right for the Lord, or what's right for us, and not worrying about what other people think. And then it's not wrong, because part of it, like, you know, people that think that's the worst thing in the world, that's why it's like, you know, I've obviously talked about paying off quickly if you can, but if it's a low interest loan, you don't have a super high paying job, then maybe you end up taking the whole 10 years to pay it off. So that's not this super wrong thing to do that you have to feel terrible about if you actually take the full length of the loan. But if it works to pay it off quicker, you know, you save money in the long run and more goes back to you rather than to a bank. So don't feel that pressure like you have to do that.
This is kind of going off of that as well, but did you ever kind of feel like maybe, I mean, it sounds like you really kind of tackled it hard and, you know, were really committed to making it a priority. Did you ever feel like, or want to not do that as hard and just say, well, maybe I can just, you know, keep working and wait till I'm a little bit better off, and just kind of accept the interest and know that I'll be better off later?
Yeah, so eventually, like I said, I took a minimum wage job. So once my stash ran low, I started paying less a month. My $800 went to $500, and it was disappointing because I had made it my goal to pay it off as quickly as possible, but then other priorities came. You know, I got married. I had to start paying for a place to live, and so the priority left, but was still there. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah.
so? Even though priorities change, and I had a baby and all of that too, so I still cared and wanted to do it as quickly as I could.
It'll probably help having a husband that's on the same page. That's part of it, and I think, you know, that's probably one of the topics is either this semester or last semester, but if you do feel like to get married, a lot of that, you know, this stuff comes down to, are you on the same page with your spouse? Because if they're on this extreme other end of wanting to spend a lot and you're over here, or vice versa, if you're kind of love to spend money and they don't, you have to figure out what is that balance for you. So maybe you have some type of compromise and you'd love to pay it off quicker, but it's not worth losing your marriage over to pay it off that extra year fast. But if you're going to be losing your home and losing your car because they're spending like crazy, then you also need to kind of figure out that balance as well. So there's a lot of things that throughout life continually adapt as new situations come your way.
Julian, how much debt did you have to loan?
I had $20,000.
I'd say, yeah, kind of last thing is, I think our hearts have a tendency to make something an idol always. And so I think, you know, for consumeristic society, buying stuff becomes an idol because that thing's going to give me that kind of jolt of something in my brain that feels good because I just bought that new thing and it looks good and it's fun for a week or two, and then I forget and then I need to buy something else. But we can also switch, and then, you know, having no debt and all that kind of stuff can also eventually become an idol, where we become this aesthetic person, you know, where it's, I never have anything and I judge everybody else that has things that are nicer than me. And so a lot of it's just constantly guarding your heart. How are you, again, you know, back to the beginning, how are you stewarding well? How are your resources that are already God's, glorifying Him? So am I spending money on school because I'm a vessel that's supposed to serve Him and build His kingdom? So does getting this degree make me more effective to build the kingdom? Or am I just getting it just to get a degree? You know, just getting this furthering education, is it something, so I have some couple letters after my name that are going to impress people? Or is it that's going to allow me to have this role that's going to help me to help more people because God's put this passion in my life? So I think our idols just shift, and some idols look a lot more appealing and nice and societally friendly than others, but our hearts are always drawn to that. So I think just keep people in your life that are keeping you accountable, so you don't become like that drunken peasant that falls off the donkey on either side, but you really do try to kind of stay balanced and keep that perspective on what the greater value is of things. So, anything else? Yeah, and if there's anything else you want later, like I said, I do have like some charts and graphs that Randy Lewis, business professor, given me some debt payoff amounts, how to do that, some scenarios of debt payoff, so I could even email those to you or whatever if you ever want. So, thanks. Eat more and drink more.